The Bible Squad, Chicago Origins. Long before skyscrapers pierced the clouds above Lake Michigan, the land that would become Chicago bore witness to shadows and light. The first peoples who dwelled along the waters saw the cycles of life and death, peace and conflict, but behind their struggles moved an ancient, unseen war, spirits that whispered of fear, greed, and bloodshed. When European settlers arrived in the late 1600s, they brought both the cross of Christ and the chains of conquest. Some prayed for the city's peace, while others left doors open for darker powers to enter. By the 1800s, Chicago had grown into a city of industry and opportunity. Revivalists like Dwight L. Moody preached in tents and tabernacles, declaring that this city could be a light for the world. But just as the gospel was sown, so too did corruption take root in back alleys and saloons. Prostitution, gambling, and gang violence became masks for ancient spirits that had never left. Then came the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. While history remembers it as a blaze sparked by accident, few know the deeper story whispered in old journals tucked away in forgotten church basements. Some claimed the flames were not only wood and coal but fueled by spiritual unrest, an attempt by the forces of darkness to consume a city destined for God's work. Amid the ruins, believers rebuilt with hope, yet also sealed away ancient writings and warnings, knowing the battle would not end with brick and stone. Across generations, the war moved in shadows. Prohibition birthed gangsters whose lust for power left rivers of blood on the streets. The crack epidemic of the 1980s strangled whole neighborhoods in despair. Each wave of darkness was more than human, it was fed by unseen principalities that thrived on fear and destruction. But God always preserved a remnant. Families who prayed in living rooms when churches were boarded up. Pastors who preached Christ's hope on corners where bullets flew. Children who whispered prayers before bed while sirens wailed outside their windows. Through them, light never died in Chicago, it flickered, waiting. Now, in the present, a new stirring begins. The old writings from Moody's time resurface, unearthed by chance in a South Side church basement set for demolition. They speak of a time when the battle would break openly again, when the youth of the city would be chosen as watchmen to stand against the rising tide. Not by their strength, not by weapons, but by the word of God and the armor of faith. And so, the story begins, not with seasoned warriors, but with a handful of ordinary kids, unaware that the same ancient war is about to knock on their own door. Prologue. The Forgotten Journal. The demolition crews were scheduled for the morning. The old South Side church had stood empty for nearly 20 years, its windows boarded, its roof sagging from too many Chicago winters. The sanctuary that once rang with hymns now echoed only with pigeons' wings and the scurry of rats. But on this final night, one last caretaker made his rounds. Pastor Elijah Johnson, long retired, shuffled through the dust with a flashlight in hand. He was nearly 80, his back bent with age, but his eyes sharp with memory. He had preached in this building as a young man when the pews were still full and the Spirit of God moved like fire. Tonight, he came not to save the church, but to honor it before it fell. He paused at the altar, brushing dust from the worn wood. "You've seen better days," he whispered, his voice rough as gravel. "But the Lord had his work here. He always does." As he turned to leave, his foot struck a loose floorboard near the pulpit. The sound was hollow. Curious, Elijah stooped down, pried at the wood with trembling fingers, and lifted it free. Beneath lay a small compartment, hidden and untouched for generations. Inside rested a bundle wrapped in brittle cloth, yellowed with time. Elijah set it on the altar and carefully unwrapped it. A leather-bound journal emerged, cracked but intact. Its pages, though faded, carried words written in hurried ink, prayers, warnings, and accounts of things long forgotten. He read by flashlight, lips moving. The words chilled him. The fire was not only of wood and coal, but of spirits. The darkness sought to consume the city. Yet God preserved his remnant. The battle is not ended. When the youth rise, the enemy will rise also. Watch, therefore, and be ready. Elijah closed the journal slowly. His heart pounded like it had the first time he ever preached. He knew what this meant, He had felt it in the city's heartbeat for years. The anger, the despair, the way violence seemed to crawl out of the very alleys at night. This book was not just history. It was prophecy. A creak echoed from the back of the church. Startled, Elijah turned. A group of teenagers had slipped inside, their bikes leaning against the outside wall. They weren't here for prayer, they were explorers, maybe even troublemakers, drawn by the lure of an abandoned building. But Elijah didn't see mischief when the flashlight beam landed on their faces. He saw something else. Potential. "Come here, children," Elijah said, his voice low but steady. He held the journal against his chest. "The Lord may have kept this hidden. For you." The teens glanced at each other, uncertain, but something in the old man's eyes compelled them forward. The past and present touched in that moment, as the forgotten words of history found their way into new hands. And outside, in the city streets where shadows stretched long and sirens wailed, unseen forces stirred, watching, waiting. The battle that began long ago was about to awaken again. This scene bridges the historical foundation into the present, directly placing the kids in line with the prophecy. It also introduces a wise, prophetic guide in Pastor Elijah, who passes the torch.